Hello and welcome back to the Perpetual Now. I'm your host Sin, and today I'm going to talk a little bit about depressive suicidal black metal. One of the more controversial and infamous genres of metal, black metal, by nature, is built on two things: ashes of burnt churches, a fascination with darkness, and existing on the fringes of society. Three things. It's built on three things. Now, over time, as it was with other metal genres, black metal too has fragmented into numerous subgenres, each one pushing the music in different directions, and each one seemingly a little more fringe than the others before it. Depressive suicidal black metal exists as a subdivision and/or a tangent of atmospheric black metal. If there's a singular jump-off point to be identified for the emergence of depressive and depressive suicidal black metal, that would be Burzum's 1993 and 1994 albums Vyslyset Taros and Filosofem. In these records, Burzum branched out from the more traditional black metal sound that was prevalent in Burzum, Aske, and Datsomengangvar, and turned to a more atmospheric sound with more stretched out, longer songs, more repetition, and impeccable, increasingly dark and more desperate atmosphere. There are many bands that are now flooding the genre, some more famous than others, including Zastor, No Point in Living, Nun, Hanging Garden, Thy Light, and the subject of today's review, Nihilistium. As it is often the case with suicidal black metal bands, Nihilistium is a one-woman project, a relatively young project. Nihilistium's debut album, Melancholic Delusions, came out in August 2019, followed very closely by the second full-length, Bloody Echoes of Mental Internal Screams, which, by its title alone, should give you a pretty good idea of what you're going to be in for. In terms of music, I think Nihilistium's sound can be described as a potent mix of black metal, depressive black metal, and funeral doom. If this sounds a little too abstract, let me just try and break it down. What I mean by a mixture of black metal, depressive black metal, and funeral doom is you get these long, extended funeral dirges that aim to put you in the mindset that Nihilistium was when she wrote and recorded this album. The thing that's very difficult to achieve when you're making depressive black metal is striking a balance between what you want to express and actually managing to express it in a succinct, concise manner. What I mean by that is you don't just get to throw in a few minor chords and tremolo pick them and just get to call it a day after that. To that end, I think the riffs that Nihilistium pours out throughout this album, few as they might be, are on point and have been geared towards maximum devastation. The entirety of Bloody Echoes of Mental Internal Screams is focused more on showing you the mental anguish and internal turmoil and agony felt by Nihilistium rather than try to induce it in you. So as such, the album is more of a demonstration than an invocation. That doesn't mean that the album isn't evocative in terms of the emotions that it conveys. It certainly is, because after all, depressive suicidal black metal thrives on being able to evoke emotions in the listener. The main method Nihilistium uses to drive its point home and drive you into the ground is repetition. Instead of focusing on a variety of riffs, change of tempos, or anything like that, the album is geared towards bringing you this one incredible, hard-hitting, soul-fucking riff and then repeating it until it induces a sort of hypnotic feeling. A perfect example of this are the two opening tracks, Endless Ceaseless Heartache and Perishing Hope. Both of these tracks feature a grand total of one main riff. Apart from a slightly softer, almost borderline jazzy passage in the middle of Endless Ceaseless Heartache, the entire song is focused more on driving the point home. However, Nihilistium manages to excel in something that is exceedingly difficult to achieve, which is creating variety within that single riff. Throughout the bulk of these tracks, this riff keeps repeating and repeating. However, it never gets boring on account of some kind of variation going on in the background rather than with the riff itself. This variation usually comes in the form of vocals, which come in two distinct forms, and I have to say that the way the vocals are utilized is incredibly refreshing. The main type of vocal that you get are screams, but by screams I don't mean your typical kind of high-pitched black metal shrieks or low growls or anything like that. This isn't ginger. This is anguished, tormented, throat-ripping, really high-pitched and agonized screaming. There is zero art to the screams. There is no vocal patterns. It is not out of a concern to deliver you lyrics in some kind of fashion. They are just here to add to the sheer weight of the emotion that is being poured out of the music. The second type of vocal that you get is really high-pitched, kind of like beyond falsetto singing, but that kind of singing, again, is not really concerned with delivering you any lyrics, because while they're not really intelligible, but the point is, it doesn't really matter, because rather than specific expressions of what is going on, it allows you to focus more on the totality of what is being brought to you. Of course, an album of funeral dirges, despite how good it might be, can end up pretty boring because of the relatively low tempo and an overall lack of variety, and this is a trap that Nihilistium manages to avoid quite gracefully. The first deviation from the catastrophic melancholic mood comes in the form of a solution called Suicide, an interlude song that decidedly has a softer touch. I mean, to me, it's just Nihilistium having a Tom Het moment, as Burzum did on Visliset Taros. It manages to break up the album quite nicely and prepares you for the tour de force that will be the final song, Of Voices. Of Voices ends the album in quite a ferocious note and is the song that features the most amount of riffs, 2 if memory serves, on the entire album. It is closer to a second wave of black metal song in that it has these really fast D beats and tremolo-picked riffs, which mix quite nicely with Nihilistium's high-pitched vocal style, and it ends the album on a sort of melodic black metal, high epic kind of note. All this is well and good, but all of this may have been for naught if it wasn't for the production. Now, in case you haven't watched any of my other videos, I think that for an album to reach its full potential, it needs to be produced perfectly. But by perfect production, I don't mean perfectly polished or perfectly raw. The yardstick example that I'm going to use here, and an example that is rather close to Bloody Echoes of Mental Internal Screams, would be Darkthrone's Transylvanian Hunger. Widely regarded as being a complete catastrophe in terms of its production, Transylvanian Hunger manages to be the perfectly produced album because the way that it's produced fits the music perfectly, which is also kind of the case with Nihilistium here. The mix of this album is quite well, actually. It strikes a nice balance between the different elements being thrown together. None of the elements tend to overshadow one another, and, most importantly, you can hear the drums quite clearly. However, where this album kind of falters, I think, is the mastering. You see, in keeping it raw, the master sort of fails to completely utilize the stereo space as well as it should, in that the entire album sounds like it is somewhat at a distance. By this, I don't mean quite at a distance, like Pavesh N, for instance. I mean that whatever is going on, whatever pain is being expressed and experienced, it's not that you are there in the situation, you're not in the room where this is happening. It's more like you are in your living room and the whole thing is happening right across the street from you, and you're sort of watching from behind a glass. This keeping things at a distance is sort of detrimental to the album's overall impact, mainly because it doesn't quite pull you in as much as it could have. However, I think this is more of a minor gripe on my part because it doesn't really quite rob the album of any kind of impact. It is still one of the most depressing, one of the darkest, one of the heaviest albums that you will hear that came out in 2019. And I mean, that's no mean feat considering the fact that none released Damp Chill of Life, which I believe was one of the best albums of last year, so the competition for that was quite stiff. I think in the end, if you're looking for dark, brooding, extremely moody, depressing music, if you want to feel the very depths of despair, I think Bloody Echoes of Mental Internal Screams is the album for you. I would highly recommend this to black metal fans, anyone looking for dark and depressing music, funeral doom fans, and just anyone who might be interested in hearing some genuine expression. I would give this album an 8 out of 10, and I would highly recommend you take a listen. If you have already listened to it, or if you're already a fan of Nihilistium, or just didn't like it at all, please let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't actually listened to it, there's a Bandcamp link in the description. I suggest you click that and go take a listen, and then tell me what you think. For now though, I think I'm going to go and listen to something else on account of having finished my first review in this new format. So until next time, this is Ethan. Peace out.